Welcome to Founding Chronicles, where we bring forgotten pieces of American history back to life. If you enjoy stories like this one, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the past. Now, let's step back in time. The town of Selkirk, tucked away in the rolling hills of upstate New York, was a quiet little place at the close of the 19th century. Its streets were not much more than dirt paths, lined with maple trees that flamed red and gold each autumn, and its handful of stores stood close together like old neighbors whispering among themselves. In 1899, Selkirk was no more than a dot on the railway map, a place where trains sometimes slowed but rarely stopped, and where life moved at the steady pace of the seasons. The people of Selkirk prided themselves on hard work, church on Sundays, and a quiet respect for tradition. Yet behind the tidy fences and barns, there were stories. Every old town has them. Whispers about feuds, about tragedies that never made it to the newspapers, about families that carried more sorrow than they let on. For Selkirk, the deepest of these stories, the one that would mark the town forever, was the strange disappearance of the 7 parish sisters, daughters of a single mother, young women who one day were simply gone. No one in Selkirk could ever say exactly what happened to them. The records are thin, the memories fragile, and yet the tale lingers. It lingers because those who were children in 1899 remembered the sudden silence, the way the household at the edge of the woods stood empty, as though it had never been filled, with laughter, footsteps, or song. The parish family had not been wealthy, but neither were they destitute. Their father, Henry Parish, had worked the railway lines, laying track and keeping up the signals until a sudden fever carried him away in 1892. His widow Margaret was left with 7 daughters ranging from early teens to small children. People of the town often shook their heads in sympathy at her burden, but Margaret was made of tough fiber. She scrubbed floors for neighbors, took in washing, and sometimes sewed dresses when she could find women willing to pay. The 7 girls grew up close to one another, learning to work as a unit. The sisters, Anna, Clara, Ruth, Martha, Lillian, Edith, and the youngest, Grace, were known around town as polite but somewhat withdrawn. They weren't the type of girls who attended dances often, nor did they court the local farm boys with giggles and batting lashes. They seemed to prefer one another's company, walking arm in arm along the paths, sharing secrets among themselves. If one sister was seen, more often than not, the others were close behind. By 1899, the girls ranged from their early 20s down to 15. They were on the cusp of lives that might have branched in different directions: marriages, work, perhaps even leaving Selkirk for the larger towns. But that summer, when the heat settled over the land and the railroad tracks shimmered in the sun, something began to stir that would change everything. The first odd thing was the singing. Townsfolk who lived near the parish home, which sat on the edge of the woods beyond the creek, said they often heard the sisters singing at night. Not hymns, not the sweet folk songs that mothers hummed to their children, but strange harmonies that carried into the darkness. The voices were high and haunting, weaving together in patterns that sounded both beautiful and unsettling. Some said it was nothing more than girls amusing themselves after a long day of work, but others swore the songs carried words not found in any book of Psalms. Old Mrs. Keating, who lived down the lane, recalled that the sisters' voices didn't sound like church singing at all, but like something older. Older than this town. Older than any hymn I ever heard. She told this many years later, her hands trembling as she spoke, as if the memory itself unsettled her. Then there were the lanterns. Travelers on the road at night sometimes claimed they saw faint lights moving in the trees behind the parish home. Not the steady glow of a lamp held in the hand, but flickers, as if someone had hung lanterns in the branches. Of course, it could have been fireflies or the eyes of animals catching the moonlight, but the stories took on a life of their own. In a place like Selkirk, where life was simple and quiet, even the smallest oddity grew into rumor. By September of 1899, the talk had reached a fever. Folks wondered what the parish girls were up to in that house. Why didn't they come to town as often? Why were they always seen together whispering among themselves? A few of the older men scoffed at it, saying people had nothing better to do than spin tales. But women who lived nearby confessed they felt uneasy passing the parish place after dark. And then, in the last week of October, the house went silent. It was young Tommy Harris, a boy of 12, who first noticed. He often cut through the woods on his way to school, and he liked to watch the sisters through the fence when they were hanging laundry or working in the yard. But that week, the yard was empty. The clothesline hung bare. Smoke no longer curled from the chimney. The shutters, always kept neatly open, were drawn shut. When Tommy told his mother, she shrugged it off at first, but by the third day she began to wonder. She sent her husband to check, and he returned with a puzzled look, saying the house seemed abandoned. The door was locked, the windows closed, and no sound of life stirred inside. By Sunday, the townsfolk decided something must be wrong. The pastor, Reverend Wallace, and two of the neighbors went together and forced open the door. What they found inside was strange and unsettling. The house was neat, too neat. The dishes were washed and stacked. The floor was swept. Beds were made. But there was no sign of the sisters. Not a note, not a suitcase missing, not a garment taken. All their belongings remained. Their shoes stood neatly lined by the door. Their sewing work was left in baskets as though waiting for them to return. Even a loaf of bread, half sliced, sat on the table, gone hard with age. The only unusual thing was the smell of wax. In the front parlor, 7 candles had been burned down to stubs, arranged in a rough circle on the floor. The Reverend, unnerved, gathered the candles and tucked them into a cloth sack, muttering about foolishness and superstition. He told the others that the sisters had likely gone to visit relatives, though no one could name any kin beyond Selkirk. But when a week passed, and then another, and no letters or word came, the town grew restless. Where had the 7 sisters gone? The sheriff organized a search, combing the woods and the creek banks. The railway was checked, the roads questioned. Farmers said they hadn't seen the girls pass by. No one in the neighboring towns recalled them. It was as though the sisters had walked into the night and vanished. Whispers grew darker. Some said the girls had run off together, perhaps following some traveling preacher or a band of actors. Others whispered of drownings, of pacts made in secret, of old superstitions, not spoken of in polite company. And some, lowering their voices, wondered if the land itself had swallowed them whole. The house was left to stand empty. Margaret Parish, broken by the loss of her daughters, did not survive the winter. Some said she wasted away from grief. Others claimed she knew more than she had ever told, and the knowledge consumed her. By spring, only the bare frame of the house remained, windows dark, roof sagging under the rains. But the story did not die. Children whispered it on the way to school. Men told it in hushed voices over drinks. Travelers who passed through Selkirk sometimes heard mention of it and carried the tale onward. It became not just a mystery, but a shadow that lingered over the town. And in the years that followed, people swore that on certain nights, if the wind was just right, you could hear the faint strains of 7 voices singing in the trees beyond the abandoned house. Winter came early to Selkirk in 1899. By November, the winds carried sharp teeth, and snow dusted the fields like white ash. For a town so small, the disappearance of 7 young women had shaken its very soul. The parish house, standing alone, at the edge of the woods, was like a wound everyone could see but no one could heal. Folks avoided walking past it if they could. Children dared each other to creep up onto its porch. But even the boldest never lasted more than a few minutes before fleeing back to the safety of the road. The Reverend Wallace determined to keep. His flock, from falling into whispers of witchcraft or curses, preached harder than ever. He thundered from the pulpit about God's mysteries, about keeping faith, about not wandering into superstition. But the harder he pushed, the less it seemed to work. People could not help but wonder. It was not just the absence of the sisters that gnawed at them, but the way they had left. No tracks in the snow that first week. No letters to family, no talk in the weeks leading up to it. And those candles, the circle of melted stubs on the parlor floor. Every time someone remembered that detail, a shiver ran through the room. Some said the sisters had made a pact to run away together, perhaps to seek work in Albany or even farther off, maybe New York City. But no job postings had reached Selkirk. No relatives had sent word, and no strangers had come through recruiting. And what kind of runaway leaves her shoes, her Sunday dress, her winter cloak behind? By December, the sheriff admitted he had no answers. The searches had been exhausted. The railwaymen reported no sign of 7 women boarding trains. The river had been dragged, though the ice made the work miserable. No bodies were found. That was when the stories began to take on darker color. Old Mrs. Keating swore she heard. Singing in the woods again, 7 voices weaving in harmony. She said she woke in the night and thought at first it was wind in the branches. But when she listened, she recognized the same melodies she had heard in October. Her son told her it was nonsense, just a dream. But Mrs. Keating's eyes were fierce when she told the story. "You don't mistake voices you've known for years," she said. "Those girls were out there singing. A farmhand named Joseph Miller said he saw lights moving among the trees one night while walking home. Late. Lanterns, he thought at first. But the way the lights swayed and dipped, it didn't look like any hand-carried flame. He told his employer, but the man warned him to keep quiet. People had enough fear already without adding fuel to it. By the turn of the year, Selkirk was a town heavy with unease. Families drew tighter together. Parents warned daughters not to wander, not to walk alone. At night, shutters were pulled closed, lamps turned down low. A stillness fell, as though the whole town was holding its breath. Then, in January of 1900, a boy from a neighboring hamlet came to town with a strange tale. He claimed he had seen 7 women standing at the edge of the frozen creek, their dresses thin as though it were midsummer, their hair loose around their shoulders. He said they did not speak, did not move, only stood there with their faces, pale in the moonlight. When he shouted to them, they turned all at once and slipped into the trees, silent as shadows. The boy's mother scolded him for telling such tales, but the story spread like fire through Selkirk. Some dismissed it outright, but others whispered that the parish sisters were not gone at all, that they had crossed into some place between the living and the dead. The sheriff, tired of the rumors, made one final sweep of the parish house. A few men joined him, carrying lanterns into the silent rooms. They found nothing, no sign of recent occupation, no footprints in the snow around the property. But in the parlor, on the mantel above the cold hearth, they discovered something odd. 7 feathers, black, glossy, laid side by side as though placed with intention. No one could explain it. No one admitted to putting them there. Some claimed it was a prank by children, but the arrangement was too deliberate, too careful. The feathers were gathered into a neat line, as though someone had counted them. The sheriff pocketed them, saying nothing, but word got out. Soon people were whispering about omens, about birds as messengers, about the old belief that crows carried souls between worlds. A sense of dread deepened, and the parish house seemed less and less like a simple place left empty and more like a threshold to something unseen. In February, the winter storms grew fierce. The snow piled high, blocking the roads and making travel nearly impossible. Families huddled close, stoking fires, waiting for the thaw. And in that darkness, stories grew. Some whispered that the parish girls had been taken by someone, or something, that walked the woods. Others muttered about an old curse. about land that had once belonged to native tribes before the settlers came, land that carried grudges older than the town itself. And others, the most fearful, believed the sisters had called something themselves, with their midnight singing and their candles in a circle. By March, when the snows began to melt, a few men set out to clear the roads and check the fences. Near the creek, they found something buried in the ice, something that made their hearts stop. A shoe. Just one. A small woman's shoe. The leather stiff, the laces torn. It lay half-trapped in the frozen mud, as though discarded or ripped away. The men dug it out, carried it back to town, and set it on the sheriff's desk. When the shoe was shown to Mrs. Keating, she swore it belonged to Edith Parrish, the second youngest. "She wore it to church many a Sunday," the old woman insisted. But if Edith's shoe had been there, where were the rest? And why only one? The sheriff cautioned against leaping to conclusions. But in the tavern, the whispers grew. Folks wondered if the sisters had indeed walked into the woods, barefoot in the dead of night, or if something had dragged them there, leaving only scraps behind. The truth, of course, was no one knew, and the not knowing was worse than anything else. By spring, the parish house was falling into ruin. Rain poured through broken shingles. Weeds sprouted high around the fence. No one claimed the property. No one wanted to. Some said it should be burned to the ground, but the Reverend forbade it, saying destruction would solve nothing. Still, people avoided it. Children crossed the street rather than pass the lane. Women hurried by with heads down. The house seemed to watch them, its windows like hollow eyes. And in Selkirk, the story of the Seven Sisters settled into legend. The older folks said it would pass, that in time people would stop talking about it. But time only deepened the strangeness. Travelers passing through often asked about the abandoned house. Some even claimed to hear music when they walked by, and more than one person swore they had glimpsed figures at the window, 7 shadows, lined up in silence, no evidence ever. Proved where the sisters went, no trace was ever found beyond that single shoe and those black feathers. But in the quiet corners of Selkirk, people carried their own truths. Some believed the sisters had met with foul play. Others believed they had stepped willingly into something beyond human understanding. And every so often, when the night was still and the air carried just the right chill, someone would swear they heard singing drifting out from the woods. 7 voices, soft, weaving together in harmony, the voices of the lost parish sisters. The new century brought no relief to Selkirk. The snow melted, the creek swelled, the maples grew green again, but the mystery of the 7 parish sisters lingered like a fog that refused to lift. Folks hoped the passing of months might bring answers. Instead, it brought strangers. In the summer of 1900, a reporter from Albany arrived, notebook in hand. His name was Daniel Fitch, a thin man with sharp eyes and a voice that carried. He had heard rumors of the vanished sisters of Selkirk and smelled a story that might sell newspapers. He went door to door, pressing people for details. Most were reluctant to speak, but a few gave him fragments: the singing, the lantern lights, the candles in the parlor, the shoe in the ice. When Fitch's article appeared in print, it painted Selkirk as a haunted place, a town of superstition and secrets. The story spread far beyond Albany, carried by word of mouth, picked up in smaller papers, told around supper tables in places that had never heard of Selkirk before. Travelers began drifting in, curious to see the house of the 7 sisters. Some came in earnest, hoping to find clues. Others came only for thrills. The townsfolk were not pleased. They were proud people, not circus performers. The Reverend Wallace railed from the pulpit against outsiders who feed on tragedy like crows on a carcass. But his words did little. Once a story takes root, it grows on its own. Some visitors claimed to have seen things. A woman from Albany fainted when she swore she heard voices singing near the creek at dusk. A pair of men camping near the woods said they woke to see 7 figures standing at the tree line, watching silently. When they lit their lanterns, the figures melted into the dark. Most townsfolk rolled their eyes, but they could not shake the unease. Even those who scoffed at superstition admitted they did not walk near the parish house after nightfall. By autumn of 1900, Fitch returned to Selkirk for a follow-up article. This time, he brought a photographer. The photographer set up his camera on the road and snapped a picture of the ruined parish home. When the plate was developed, some swore they saw faint shapes in the upstairs window, 7 blurred forms, lined together as though posing for a family portrait. The photographer dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the rumor spread faster than fire in dry grass. Copies of the image circulated, and people swore the faces of the parish sisters stared back at them from the shadows of the glass. For the townsfolk, it was like salt in a wound. They wanted quiet, they wanted peace. But now Selkirk was known as the town of the vanished sisters. Stagecoaches rattled down its streets carrying gawkers. Some left pennies on the parish porch for the spirits. Others carved their names into the shutters as proof of their visit. By 1901, a traveling preacher arrived claiming he could cleanse the land. He set up a tent revival at the edge of town, calling the people of Selkirk to repent, declaring the sisters had been taken because of hidden sin in the community. Some flocked to him, desperate for answers. Others cursed him as a charlatan. When the preacher led a procession to the parish house, chanting and waving Bibles, the crowd followed. They circled the house, prayed, shouted. But then something strange happened. A sudden wind rose, though the sky was clear. It tore through the trees, rattling the shutters, nearly toppling the preacher's tent. Women clutched their children. Men staggered back. The preacher shouted louder, but his voice was drowned by the howl of the wind. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. The house stood silent. The preacher left town the next morning. After that, Selkirk changed. Folks grew, protective of their story. They stopped talking to outsiders. When visitors came, they were met with cold stares. The townsfolk wanted no more gawkers, no more articles, no more photographs. But still the story spread. By 1903, it had become legend far beyond Selkirk. In taverns from New England to Pennsylvania, men told the tale of the 7 sisters who vanished into the woods. Some said they had been witches. Others said they had been taken by the river. Some told it with pity, others with fear. But always the number was the same, 7. And within Selkirk itself, the legend deepened. Children dared each other to stand at the edge of the parish yard and call out the sisters' names. Some swore that if you called 3 times, you would hear faint footsteps behind you, though no one was there. Young couples whispered that if you walked hand in hand near the creek, you might hear the sisters' song, a melody so sweet it made your heart ache. And some said if you followed the song, you would never return. The sheriff who had once searched for the girls grew old and resigned. He rarely spoke of the case, but when pressed, he would shake his head and say, "We looked everywhere, boys, everywhere, and I'll tell you this, whatever happened, it wasn't something a badge could solve." By 1905, the parish house was collapsing. The roof had caved in on one side, the porch sagged, vines crept up the walls. Some said the land should be cleared, the house torn down, but others warned against it. "Better to leave it be," they said. "Some places don't want to be disturbed." And so it stood, year after year, a rotting monument to absence. Yet even as the building crumbled, the legend grew. Families who moved away carried it with them. Soldiers who left for the Spanish-American War told it around campfires. And in Selkirk, the old folks told the story in low voices, their eyes darting toward the woods as though the sisters still lingered there. The strangest thing, though, was how often the number 7 seemed to appear in the years that followed. In 1906, 7 barns burned in a single storm. In 1908, 7 cows were found dead in a pasture, their bodies unmarked. In 1910, 7 children came down with a fever all in the same week. Each time, someone muttered about the sisters. Each time, someone said their name with a shiver. By the second decade of the century, Selkirk had resigned itself. The parish sisters were not coming back. Their story was no longer just a tragedy, it was a haunting. A reminder that even in a nation rushing into the modern age, some mysteries refused to be solved. And the strangest part was this. Even those who scoffed, even those who claimed it was nothing but old wives' tales, would pause if you asked them to walk by the parish house at midnight. They would laugh, they would wave it off, but they would not go. Not alone, not in the dark. Because in Selkirk, people knew what they had heard. Voices in the trees, lanterns in the branches, 7 shadows at the window, and above all, they remembered the sound of singing. 7 voices braided together, carrying across the still night air. The sound of the parish sisters still waiting, still watching, long after the world had left them behind. Decades rolled forward, carrying the rest of the world into the bright promise of the 20th century. Automobiles appeared on the roads, telephones rang in kitchens, electricity hummed through wires. But Selkirk, though touched by progress, remained a small town rooted in its soil. And through all the changes, one thing never faded: the story of the 7 parish sisters. By the 1920s, few who had known the girls in life were still around, but their absence lingered like an empty chair at every table. The parish house, sagging and hollow, had become more ruin than home. Windows shattered by storms, timbers warped, weeds swallowing the porch. Travelers passing through stopped to stare, whispering to each other. Local boys carved initials into the doorframe, proof of their courage. But none lingered after nightfall. The town council debated tearing it down, yet each time the matter came to vote, hesitation filled the room. Some argued it was unsafe, a danger to curious children. Others warned it was unwise to disturb what had settled there. One councilman, a gray-haired man whose father had searched for the girls in 1899, said simply, "Leave it. That house belongs to them now." And so it stood, year after year, decaying yet untouchable. The story became tradition. Parents told it to their children, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a bedtime shiver. On Halloween nights, daring young folks crept close to the house and swore they heard voices on the wind. A farmer claimed he saw 7 figures walking across his field at dusk, their dresses rippling though the air was still. A hunter swore he followed footprints in the snow that began as one set, then split into 7, before vanishing all at once. During the Depression, when hunger and hardship hung heavy, the story found new weight. People said the sisters' disappearance had been a sign that Selkirk was a place touched by fate, set apart from the world. Preachers used the tale as proof of God's mysteries, while skeptics mocked it as small-town nonsense. Yet even the EIZ skeptics would not walk past the parish place alone at night. Then came the war years. Young men marched away, some never to return. Letters carried news of battles oceans away. Yet even then, in foxholes and barracks, Selkirk boys told the tale of their hometown. They spoke of the sisters who vanished, of the singing in the woods, of the empty house no one dared to claim. Some said the story comforted them. It reminded them that there were mysteries stranger than death, and that even in war, the unknown walked with them. After the war, America changed. Highways cut across farmland, cities swelled. Small towns, like Selkirk, grew quieter, overlooked. But still the story lived. In the 1950s, a group of college students from Albany came to investigate, armed with tape recorders and cameras. They spent a night in the crumbling house, daring each other to sit alone in the parlor where the candles had once burned. When they left, their voices shook as they told of hearing whispers, of footsteps on the stairs though no one was there. The tapes they made were filled with static, but one section, faint and nearly lost, carried the sound of humming, 7 notes, rising and falling together. The students published their findings in a campus magazine. Soon after, Selkirk saw a wave of curious visitors again, amateur ghost hunters, historians, thrill seekers. The townsfolk, weary of outsiders, grew cold and tight-lipped. Some refused to speak of the sisters at all. Others repeated the old warning, "Best leave it be. That house belongs to them." By the 1970s, the parish house had nearly collapsed. The roof was gone, the walls leaning, the porch swallowed by weeds. A storm in 1978 finally tore half of it down. The remains were cleared away, leaving only a stone foundation choked with moss. Yet even without the house, the land carried its weight. Folks still avoided it. Travelers still stopped to stare. Children still whispered the story on their way home from school. As the century wore on, the legend spread beyond Selkirk. Folklorists collected it, ghost storybooks printed it, and storytellers wove it into their performances. Each telling was a little different. Some claimed the sisters drowned, some said they were witches, some whispered they walked into the woods and never returned. But always the number remained the same. 7. 7 sisters gone without a trace. And in Selkirk, the memories endured. Elderly residents, faces lined by time, still swore they remembered the singing, that soft, haunting harmony that drifted across the fields on autumn nights. Hunters spoke of strange lights flickering among the trees. Teenagers dared each other to walk to the old foundation and call the sisters names. Some said if you called 3 times, you would feel a hand on your shoulder. Others said if you listened closely enough, you would hear a faint song carried on the wind. Even today, more than a century later, the story lives. The land where the parish house once stood is overgrown, the foundation half buried by weeds and earth. Few visitors know where to find it, but in Selkirk the memory is never far. Ask an old man at the diner and he will lean close and tell you how his grandmother swore she saw 7 women by the creek in the winter of 1900. Ask a farmer and he will tell you of lights in the trees, lanterns that no hand carried. Ask a child, and they will whisper the rhyme passed down from playground to playground. 7 sisters, lost and gone, hear them singing at the dawn. What happened to the parish sisters of Selkirk in 1899? The question has never been answered. No bodies, no graves, no letters, no proof. Just silence, and a story that refuses to die. Perhaps they ran away together, bound for a new life that never made it into the records. Perhaps they met with tragedy, claimed by river or woods. Or perhaps, just perhaps, they stepped into something beyond this world, leaving only their voices behind. And so, in the quiet town of Selkirk, when the night is still and the air carries just the right chill, some say you can still hear them. 7 voices weaving in harmony, rising from the trees where the house once stood, the song of the parish sisters. Not forgotten, not at rest, still calling after all these years.